We saw this graphic on social media depicting people standing 6 feet apart to social distance, but that 6 feet was measured on the diagonal. If they're standing in a square, that means we have right-angled triangles. Following the Pythagorean theorem, can we find out if these people and these people on the legs are still far enough apart? Well, our Pythagorean theorem tells us that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, since this is a square, we know that these two sides are going to be the same length, so we're going to call them both a squared. So that would tell us that 2a squared would equal c squared on our hypotenuse. Well, c, that's 6. So this would be 6 squared. So our 2a squared would equal 6 squared. Well, evaluate 6 squared, and that gives us 36. So that tells us that our 2a squared is going to equal 36. Well, let's divide both sides by 2, and when we do, that means that our a squared is going to be worth 18. To find out what a is worth, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Now, 18 isn't a perfect square, so we went ahead and evaluated that before we solved this. So a comes out to be about 4.25. So if we're supposed to stand 6 feet apart and you measure it on the diagonal, that means these people on the legs are only 4¼ feet apart. Well, that's not going to be far enough. So if we need these people to be 6 feet apart, how far apart are you going to be on the hypotenuse? Well, again, going back to a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, here, our two legs would be our a and our b, even though they're the same. So 6 squared plus 6 squared is going to equal our hypotenuse squared. Well, 6 squared is 36. So that gives us 36 plus 36 to equal our hypotenuse. 36 plus 36 gives us 72. So that would be our hypotenuse squared. So to find out what our hypotenuse is, again, we need to take the square root of both sides to find out what c is worth. 72 is not a perfect square, so before we did this one, we went ahead and calculated it out, and that comes out to be about 8½ feet. So if social distancing tells us that everybody needs to stand at least 6 feet apart, that tells us that people going around the edge of the circle to be 6 feet apart are also going to be about 8½ feet apart from the people on the diagonal.